All right, it's episode 2 of the ASKJV Podcast. Today we're talking about my favorite snares for recording rock and metal, how to find projects, why to EQ before compression, and are internships still worth it these days? Let's get into it.
3, 2, 1. This is the ASKJV Show.
Our first question comes from Steven. What are your favorite snares for recording rock or metal? Specifically, snares that cut through a heavy mix enough that you don't need to sample, enhance, or replace them.
I wish I kept track of, the different names and models of snares that I've liked throughout the years. But in general, the theme that comes up for this type of music would be metal snares as opposed to wood. And I like something that's at least 6 inches deep. So Black Beauties are great. I had one in the studio for a while. I loaned it, or I borrowed it from Paul, the drummer of Silverstein. He let me borrow his U-Drum Black Beauty clone. So it's 6 inch deep by 14 across. Metal snare sounds really good in the mix. I find that the wooden snares are just a little too dull sounding in general. I mean, you can definitely find some really good ones out there, but I'd prefer a steel or brass snare. If you can get even deeper than 6 inches, that's awesome. For my personal preference, I just like that thick low end punch from the snare. So that's what I'd say. In general, avoid wooden snares. Get something that's metal and something that's at least 6 inches deep.
Our next question reads, how do you find projects and how has it changed as you've had more success?
I don't know if it's just because of the way I came up in the studio world or what, but I never really spent much time going out there searching for projects. I think it's because I started out, I was in bands, and so I just recorded my own band and then playing shows with other bands and my friends, I would record them, for free or cheap or whatever. So it just kind of, from a very, very beginner level, starting with my own band and literally my best friends. That's how I started getting my name out there, and it just kind of spread from there. I generally just got projects from people asking me about recording. So that's just an example of word of mouth, I guess. Over time, I wouldn't say it changed over time. I think the word of mouth just got more and more and more. I just had a simple website, with my discography and a link to email me to ask for quotes. That was pretty much it. I mean, I guess I could say the more it went on and I was working on, being able to get some bigger level credits, I definitely tried to leverage those a little bit, so I'd check in with, contacts at labels that I had made and say, hey, have you got anything lined up? Is there something I can mix for you or whatever? Just to keep in touch with them. I wouldn't say that often translated into actual projects, but it was good just to keep in touch because then they think of you the next time something is coming up. So that's what I would say. It's word of mouth, and I talked about on the last episode, just working hard to get your name out there so that happens. I think it's hard to just approach someone cold and say, hey, come and record with me. Especially if you're going to charge, a lot of money and you're trying to make a living with it already. You've got to get bands to trust you first. So whether that means recording for super cheap or offering a free song or free demo or something, and hopefully get to the point where you've got enough work out there, enough track record that they trust you automatically.
Here's our next question. Why do you EQ before compression rather than after?
I think it just gives me a little more control over the sound. If I do my big shaping with EQ, especially if I'm making some big boosts or cuts, EQing after is going to kind of smooth out those more extreme moves and just get a more consistent sound. There are definitely times when I would compress before EQ, but usually that's if something wasn't recording, if a vocal wasn't recorded with compression or something, or the dynamic range is just way too much on the source track, then I'll hit it with compression first, control the dynamics a bit, then I'll use EQ, and then I'll compress again after to control it even more. So that's basically my approach. If you think about it, if you were to compress first and then EQ after, let's say you're doing a big boost in the mid-range and there's no compression after the EQ, there's probably going to be certain notes or certain sections where that EQ move is more noticeable than others, if that makes sense. So maybe a certain note on the guitar or maybe a better example is bass. A certain note on the bass is going to jump out a little more if you're doing a 10 dB boost at, 60 hertz. There's certain notes where that EQ boost is going to be more evident. So by compressing afterwards, you're kind of evening out the end result of the EQ. So that's kind of how I like to think of it. And I just started, taking that approach after watching lots of mixers, especially Chris Lord-Alge, always compressing after the EQ. So that's my approach with that.
Our last question for this week: are internships still worthwhile these days?
I think it's so dependent on your situation and the opportunity you have, so it's a little hard to answer. My answer, I guess, would be they can be. If it's the old school internship idea of going to work somewhere and cleaning bathrooms for 6 months before you even get to step foot in the control room, I gotta say it's not worth it. But if you get the kind of opportunity that I had, where you are able to sit in on sessions right from day one, maybe if you can even get paid a little bit, even if it's like below minimum wage, at least to get something for your time there, then I'd recommend that. It's hard for me to say, yeah, go and sweep floors and clean bathrooms, just so you can, 6 months later get into the studio and watch something. I think that model is gone. It's harder and harder for people to work for free now. And there's so many opportunities online. Like the mixing course that I do is basically a virtual internship. You can look over my shoulder, and that's a way smaller investment in terms of time and the financial opportunity cost. If you were to go and work for free at a studio for a year, that's a huge time cost and financial cost. Can it pay off if you get good opportunities in there? Absolutely. But these days with the internet, I think there's lots more opportunity. That said, if you have a good studio or a great producer who's near you and they're willing to let you come in and shadow them and just be in the room while sessions are happening, absolutely take those opportunities. That's going to be huge. But in summary, I'd have to say, it's these days it's just not worth it to go and clean toilets for 6 months. All right, thanks for listening to the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes, and you'll also get all of the video mixing and recording tutorials that I'm posting up there. If you're on iTunes, if you're listening on the go on your phone or whatever, make sure you subscribe to the podcast there so you get the new episodes automatically. And if you're feeling really generous, hop on iTunes and leave us a review for the podcast. That'll help more people see it. We need your questions, so go to AskJVPod.com or use the hashtag AskJV on Twitter or other social networks to get your questions in, and we'll see you next week on the next show.